I've seen enough of Grummz over the past couple of weeks to kind of get a good handle on him. And surprise, he's a complete retard. Like Grummz has single-handedly twisted this narrative of Gamergate 2 into something it wasn't immediately. Like this process took like what, a couple of years with the original Gamergate for people to start noticing the decline of the decline of quality of video games, and then twist and read and do everything they possibly can to like blame Nintendo for everything, right? That's what happened with Gamergate 2. With the original Gamergate was that people noticed that like games like Destiny weren't living up to expectations, right? The next generation of consoles were disappointing, and people got up in arms about it. What happens? The community rallies and they go after Nintendo. For a long period of time, there were all these complaints about the localizations and the way Nintendo was conducting themselves, like up until 2017 and when the Switch came out. And although that mindset continued going into like 2017, 2018, 2019, right? It was like very greatly diminished, right? It wasn't until The Last of Us Part 2 came out that people began to talk about like just how bad AAA games had gotten again. And lo and behold, once again, our Lord and Savior Grummz descends and starts telling us how Nintendo is the problem, right? And again, it's very transparent the way this happens every single time, right? Where these people come out, they make these very vague statements about like certain companies, and then like they go in hard against like their like business rivals, the people that they really want to see ruined, right? Like these people really want Nintendo to go woke, because if that happens, they know that like this is going to be a big black mark against their reputation, and it's something they can just kind of just celebrate over. Like I maintain, I've always believed this, that if Nintendo was the company that went woke, from 2014 onwards, that like people would have been singing and dancing and saying like, oh, this is why you don't support the kids company, right? Like that's basically what would have happened. Like, oh, this is why we don't support Nintendo, right? And it's really interesting to see how this played out, because we were told, all throughout like the past decade that like these localizations are bad, these games are bad, Nintendo is bad. But in reality, over the past decade, like Nintendo has put out like some of the best games ever. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, The Wonderful 101. Like the list goes on and on, right? They put out absolute bangers for the past decade. And what do these people do? Like sit there and just cry about things that don't matter. Oh, Paper Mario doesn't sell. Fire Emblem only appeals to weebs. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is only sold 20 million units. It's a failure. Like Mario Wonder is not a mainstream Nintendo game. Like it's... You see these people every single time throw everything they have at the wall to try and make Nintendo look bad and try to make it look like their consoles are failing or whatever. And the thing with Grummz, and I have been like noticing this, is that he's really desperate to try and like make Nintendo, specifically Nintendo of America, look as if they're on the verge of becoming woke. So woke, in fact, that he believes they will be the next Bud Light. Yes, even though Nintendo is trailing well behind Capcom and Square Enix and Sega when it comes to like accepting woke stuff, like the narrative right now is that Nintendo is actually the most woke out of all of them, because they're the worst company of them all. After all, like Nintendo is like the source of all evil in the gaming industry, not like Valve, the pure bastions of gaming that totally have measures in place to prevent DEI from taking place in the company. Like I legit saw Grummz do this, where he legit tried to pretend that Valve had measures put in place to stop woke nonsense, which is like, of course, ridiculous if you know anything about the company, where it's located, right? Like it's so weird to me that like the narrative seems to be right now that certain games are based while Nintendo is woke, right? Like again, like I've seen Grummz do this. Like he's tried to paint this narrative that like Helldivers 2 is based because like, oh, look at this, look at all this, the cool stuff you do in this game. Oh, like just ignore what the developers say on social media, ignore like the Discord mod, like the official Discord, like, oh, Helldivers 2 is like based in Red Pill. It's one of the best games ever made. Stellar Blade, same thing. Right? Like, oh, it's one of the best games ever made. Look at that ass on that female character. Like, Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like, oh, the characters in that game, they weren't pansexual, they were player sexual. It's a difference. Like, there's a difference, right? Like, you're seeing this a lot with these PC gamers in particular, like these PC focused developers. They really want to push this narrative as if PC gaming is going to be the bastion against woke culture, when in reality they've been adopting this shit. Like, they adopted this stuff like before anyone else, right? Like, it was like normalized. You can see in like Ultima 1, as early as that, they were like pushing for like transgenderism in games, right? Like, this isn't anything new. Like, these people have always been woke retards. And there seems to be this like very strong unwillingness from the community to kind of accept that, like, that they think there's like there's been some major cultural shift at Nintendo. Like, Grummz made a statement like, oh, Nintendo is sponsoring Pride Seattle. Yeah, just like they have the past several years. This is nothing new. Okay. Like, it's like people are just like freaking out over nothing, and it's just absurd to me. It really is. I think Paper Mario kind of demonstrates where we're going with this, right? Where how Nintendo is approaching like their woke nonsense in games, and they are doing it. Don't get me wrong, but like my contention is that like it's a lot more downplayed than most other companies, to the point where like it may as well not even be there, right? Like, when it comes to like Paper Mario, it's obvious they made woke changes. It's obvious that the changes are lesser than what the original localization provided, and people know the truth of the situation is the issue. Like, if anything, I think like trying to shove this stuff in is simply exposing these people or how woke culture is ruining things in society. I celebrate this, right? Like, I do think people seeing just how pervasive and invasive like LGBT culture actually is, that they do start pushing back against it. I've been seeing this in my personal life. People are getting sick of the nonsense. Nobody likes this, right? It's collapsing as we speak. So to like think that Nintendo is like this idea that like, oh, Nintendo's gonna go woke in the next 5 years, like, pushback towards LGBT culture is going to take off in a massive way over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Like, it's not going to be possible to continue getting more woke the way they have been. Like, this stuff is clearly on the way out. It's clearly declining. People aren't going to become more progressive, right? There is going to be like a regression. Like, the pendulum is going to start swinging back in a hard way. And I do think, when you look at something like Paper Mario, like, all you have to do is just be like, we're going to localize this correctly when it gets re-released. I do think that's like the big takeaway from this, is just like, oh, you're going to change our stuff? Well, we'll just change it back. Like, it's not that big of a deal, right? Is my honest like opinion on this at this point. Like, yeah, you shouldn't be worried about like censorship of media, because you can just uncensor it once you like actually do the legwork and actually take over the institutions, take the institutions back from the communists, right? Which is going to happen inevitably, by the way. Like, that's the thing about the communist takeover of America, the long march to the institutions, they called it in the 60s. Those guys do not command the same level of respect, that people that actually earned their positions did. And I do think that's going to be like a big major issue when it comes to like developers making radical changes in games, right? People keep talking about like, oh, they're gonna make radical changes to Zelda. Yeah, after like 40 years of established history and canon, like it's just the changes. The woke changes they want to make simply aren't going to fly with the actual audience, right? It's like with Star Wars, right, where there's like been a very noticeable real decline in support from like the newer shows, because like they don't respect the source material, they don't respect the fans, and like the thing is, Nintendo does respect the fans, right? They have been putting out like good content, even in this like even in the wake of like the woke takeover of world culture, right? They have still been producing good stuff, and like I don't see any reason to think that like they're gonna stop doing that just because they're pushing woke stuff in games, right? This is the thing that like really gets me about Grumz is that like and people like that is that they really think something being like woke kills the entire experience when that's not really true, is it? Right? Like plenty of woke content creators put out good stuff that people can enjoy. It's not like some big like fun killing thing inherently. You know, people can be creative, they can come up with fun, interesting scenarios, they can have fun with it, right? Like, again, the issue to me, when it comes to like most Western entertainment, is that they don't do a very good job of being entertaining, right? They don't have the talent to make good stuff and instead focus more on like promoting their bizarre worldview and trying to shove it into people's faces. And what that's resulted in is that people are just not consuming that entertainment anymore. And that's all that's going to happen if the quality goes down in Nintendo software. And I haven't seen that happen yet. You know, Princess Peach Showtime was great. If anything, I think Princess Peach Showtime kind of demonstrates what Nintendo is going to be doing going forward, where they took their iconic female character, Peach, and actually made like gave her a good, unique game that featured her as a protagonist that really did a lot to grow her as a character, right? Like, where was the praise and like the acknowledgement of what they did here. You know, like to me, like the fact that this game went ignored really demonstrates just how like the anti woke community has no real regard or interest in Nintendo software at all. Like they are, I think, in the same position that game journals were in 2008. Right, you know, back when they were calling like Resident Evil 5 racist, and before they had like complete control over the sphere, um, like back then they weren't like in control of the culture, right? To me, the way it looks right now is that like anti-woke retards are in these like major influential positions, like making all these radical claims about how like Nintendo is going to go bankrupt, like Nintendo is going to fail if they do this or this, when in reality nothing they do is going to impact them at all, like I think, because they have such a strong branding. They have such good developers. They've been putting out such great games. Like it doesn't really matter. People don't care about woke stuff in these games. Like it's just not going to affect their bottom line at all. Especially if they don't put a lot of emphasis on it, which they have been doing. They so like to me the fact that like so many people are freaking out over like Vivian, who isn't even like the biggest problem in the Thousand Year Door. Like people like keep freaking out about stuff like this. Like they don't really understand. They really are just looking for reasons to like complain about Nintendo. It's the same people who have been doing the same thing for the past 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? You know, the same people who like were screaming in your face about blast processing back in the 90s are now trying to tell you that like Nintendo's totally woke, man, while they like ignore games like Yakuza Infinite Wealth, like literally trying to tell you that like transgender women are women, trans it's like transgender women are real women. I'm sorry. I'm just like, wait a minute. What's the line? Like anyway, Infinite Wealth tries to convince you that transgender women are real women. Yes. So yeah, they are men. To put it very bluntly, but yeah, like how exactly is Nintendo more woke than that, right? You know, like I keep saying when it comes to these other like companies that like everyone tries to say that like, oh, it's the localizers, it's the evil localizers, when it's been like the core development studios for a long time, right? And only just now are we seeing like Nintendo games being changed for like localized things. So it's like I don't think that like Grum's ideas have any merit in reality, right? Like, I don't think Nintendo's going to become the next Bud Light. I don't think the fate of the next Nintendo console hinges on whether or not they go woke, right? To me, that's a complete non-issue because woke culture is on the way out, like no matter what any company says or does. Is my honest, genuine opinion on that now. Like again, like if you feel so strongly about woke culture, why are you not doing more things to stop it? Why are you not like getting involved in your local scene and like preventing like again, video games are not the most important thing in your lives, right? Like it's so frustrating seeing like people like Grummz just sit there on Twitter just like tweeting incessantly about things some developers said or did, like Alyssa Mersanti is gonna fight Vara Dark. Like who the fuck cares? Like it's like it's all just nonsensical and silly. Like again, like the reason I have more respect for Nintendo than I'll ever have for Grumps is that like Nintendo actually puts out good games, which is something that none of these anti woke group grifters can attest to.